Before he was known as the gentle giant, before the gold medals and world records, before the cheers of London's Olympic Stadium, there was simply Arthur, a tall, soft-spoken boy from the quiet hills of Manchester Parish, Jamaica. A boy whose life would stretch far beyond the running track, touching the skies as a wartime pilot and saving lives as a doctor. But in the beginning, he was just Arthur Stanley Wint, born on the 25th of May 1920 in the rural district of Plowden. Arthur's childhood was framed by the rhythms of small-town Jamaica, fields swaying in the wind, the faint hum of church hymns, and the chatter of neighbors who all knew one another by name. It was here that his early strength and natural grace became apparent. As a young boy, he moved with an ease that made older folks take notice. Tall for his age, he often towered over classmates, yet carried himself with a calm modesty. Arthur's formal education began at Calabar High School, one of Jamaica's most respected institutions. In these classrooms and dusty playing fields, his teachers began to see something rare. Track meets in those days weren't just school competitions. They were community events, and when young Arthur ran, people watched. There was something in his stride, long, fluid, and almost effortless, that seemed destined for greater stages. But Arthur's journey was not limited to the physical. He was an attentive student, equally at home in the library as on the field. His discipline in the classroom mirrored his commitment to training. This balance between mind and body would define him throughout his life. In 1937, at just 17 years old, Arthur's name began to spread beyond schoolyard whispers. That year, he was crowned Jamaica's Boy Athlete of the Year. It was an accolade that recognized not just his raw speed, but his growing mastery of multiple events. While many sprinters specialized in a single race, Arthur excelled across a range, from the searing pace of the 100 meters to the grueling endurance of the 800. The following year, his abilities carried him far from home for the first time. In 1938, Jamaica sent a team to the Central American and Caribbean Games in Panama. For a young man who had never traveled abroad, the journey alone was an adventure. But it was on the track that Arthur made history for himself, winning gold in the 800 meters and bronze in the 400-meter hurdles. It was a glimpse of the greatness to come, but Arthur himself remained humble, seeing it as another step rather than a destination. By this point, his build was remarkable, over 6 feet tall, with a lean frame that seemed engineered for both speed and stamina. Friends nicknamed him the Gentle Giant, not only for his height, but for his calm, courteous manner. Unlike many competitive athletes, Arthur never relied on bluster. He believed that performance spoke louder than words. The late 1930s were a time of change, not only for Arthur, but for the world. The clouds of global conflict were gathering, and soon the tranquil rhythm of life in Jamaica would be disrupted by events far beyond its shores. But before that storm arrived, Arthur continued to hone his craft. He trained with dedication, often under simple conditions compared to the lavish facilities athletes enjoy today. Dirt tracks, hand-time races, and improvised training gear. These were the tools of his early career. Athletics in Jamaica at the time were still developing. There was pride in competing internationally, but the infrastructure and funding were limited. For Arthur, this meant that every race was more than personal ambition. It was a representation of Jamaican talent on a broader stage. Each time he stepped to the starting line, he carried the hopes of his island, even if he didn't yet fully grasp the weight of that responsibility. Looking back, those formative years were about more than winning medals. They were about discipline, humility, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are steadily improving. Friends from his youth recalled how he never seemed flustered, never boastful. Even when he won by wide margins, he would shake his opponent's hand, offer a smile, and retreat to the shade rather than bask in the spotlight. This unshakable composure would serve him well in the years ahead. Years that would test him not only as an athlete, but as a man. For the world was on the brink of war, and soon Arthur Wint's path would take an unexpected turn from the oval track to the open skies. Arthur's story was just beginning. Ahead lay the roar of fighter planes, the quiet intensity of medical study, and the deafening cheers of Olympic glory. But before all that, he was simply a young Jamaican with a gift, and the discipline to shape that gift into history. In the late 1930s, the world stood at the edge of a storm. Across Europe and Asia, the shadows of conflict lengthened. Even in the Caribbean, thousands of miles away from the front lines, young men began to feel the pull of duty. For Arthur Wint, now in his early 20s and already a celebrated athlete, the call would take him from Jamaica's sunlit fields to the icy skies of wartime Britain. In 1942, with World War II raging, Arthur joined the Royal Air Force. Jamaica was part of the British Empire, and many Caribbean men volunteered for service. It wasn't just patriotism, it was a chance to prove themselves, to see the wider world, and, for some, to escape economic hardship. But for Arthur, it was also about challenge. He had conquered the track in his youth. Now he would test himself in an entirely different arena. He was sent to Canada for training, part of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, an ambitious program that transformed civilian recruits into skilled airmen. For a boy from the tropics, the Canadian winters were a shock. Snow, ice, and freezing winds replaced the warm Jamaican breeze. Yet Arthur adapted with his characteristic calm. His athleticism didn't go unnoticed. During his time in Canada, he set a national record in the 400 meters, his long stride carrying him with the same effortless speed that had impressed back home. Even in the midst of military drills and flight training, he found time to run, often turning heads at base competitions. By 1944, Arthur had earned his RAF wings, the proud insignia of a qualified pilot. He was assigned to fly Spitfires, the sleek, deadly fighter planes that had become a symbol of British resilience. For a man whose life had been measured in seconds on the track, the cockpit introduced a new kind of speed, one that was thrilling, dangerous, and demanded absolute focus. Flying combat missions required the same discipline Arthur had honed as an athlete, the ability to stay calm under pressure, to make rapid decisions, and to trust in training. Fellow pilots recalled his steady nerves and quiet confidence. He wasn't one for bravado. In the air, as on the track, he let his performance speak for itself. Between missions, Arthur continued to nurture his academic ambitions. Like many servicemen, he was already thinking about life after the war. His interest in medicine had been growing since his school days, inspired by the doctors who served rural Jamaica. In the RAF, he witnessed firsthand the toll that injury and illness could take, not only on soldiers, but on civilians caught in the crossfire. These experiences reinforced his desire to heal rather than harm. When the war ended in 1945, Arthur had a choice. He could return to Jamaica and resume his athletic career, or he could stay abroad and pursue further education. He chose the latter, enrolling at St. Bartholomew's Hospital Medical College in London, one of the oldest and most prestigious medical schools in the United Kingdom. It was a bold decision. Medical training was demanding, time-consuming, and expensive. But Arthur had earned a scholarship through a program for ex-servicemen, which allowed him to study without the crushing financial burden many students faced. Still, the workload was intense. Anatomy lectures, surgical practice, hours in the dissection room, late nights memorizing the complexities of the human body. Remarkably, Arthur didn't set aside his athletic pursuits entirely. He continued to train, fitting workouts into the gaps between lectures and clinical rotations. His days were a delicate balance of medicine and athletics, scalpel and stopwatch, textbooks and starting blocks. It was during these years that his legend began to grow in both arenas. In London, Arthur's presence was impossible to ignore. Towering at over 6 feet, with a calm demeanor and an easy smile, he carried himself with quiet dignity. His peers respected him not only for his athletic ability, but for his determination to excel academically. For a black man in 1940s Britain, these accomplishments carried even greater weight. The era was marked by racial prejudice, and many Caribbean servicemen faced discrimination. Arthur met these challenges with grace, refusing to let them define him. By the late 1940s, whispers began circulating in British athletic circles. The Jamaican medical student was something extraordinary. His training sessions drew attention, and his times in the 400 and 800 meters were edging toward world class. The prospect of Olympic competition was no longer a distant dream. It was a real possibility. In 1948, with his medical studies ongoing, Arthur was selected to represent Jamaica at the London Olympics, a team that also included fellow greats Herb McKinley and George Roden. For Jamaica, it was more than a sporting event. The island had never won an Olympic gold medal. Expectations were high, and the hopes of an entire nation rested on the shoulders of its runners. As the Olympic Games approached, Arthur balanced final preparations on the track with shifts in the hospital ward. Patients would later recall the tall, polite doctor in training who spoke softly and moved with quiet purpose. Few knew that in just weeks, he would step onto the world stage and change Jamaican sports history forever. Arthur Wint had flown into battle, trained as a healer, and carried himself with dignity through every challenge. But in the summer of 1948, he would face a different kind of test, one measured not in miles per hour, but in fractions of a second. The summer of 1948 arrived with a rare sense of anticipation. London, still scarred from the devastation of war, was about to host its first Olympic Games since 1936. There were no gleaming new stadiums, no lavish ceremonies. These were called the austerity games for a reason. But for athletes like Arthur Wint, the grandeur wasn't in the facilities. It was in the moment itself. For Jamaica, these games represented something much bigger than sport. The island had sent athletes to previous Olympics under the British flag. But in 1948, for the first time, Jamaica would compete as its own independent team. The green, gold, and black flag did not yet exist. Jamaica was still a British colony, but the sense of national pride among its athletes and supporters was unmistakable. This was their chance to announce themselves to the world. Arthur Wint was entered in two events, the 400 meters and the 800 meters. He was also expected to run in the 4x400 meter relay. His towering height and impossibly long stride made him a crowd favorite even before the starter's gun went off. The 800 meters came first. It was a grueling two-lap sprint, long enough to demand endurance, short enough to require blistering speed. Arthur ran brilliantly, holding his own against the best in the world. But on the final straight, American Mal Whitfield surged ahead, taking the gold. Arthur claimed silver, his first Olympic medal, but his focus shifted quickly to the 400 meters, where he would face an even more dramatic challenge. The final of the 400 meters was a showdown between Arthur and his Jamaican teammate, Herb McKinley, a man known for his fearless, front-running style. McKinley was a national hero in his own right, fast, aggressive, and supremely confident. In the days leading up to the race, the British press framed it as a battle between the two Jamaicans. When the starter's gun fired, McKinley exploded out of the blocks, his long, powerful strides eating up the stagger on the back straight. By 200 meters, he had built what looked like an insurmountable lead. Arthur, running his usual measured race, was well behind. Spectators assumed McKinley would hold on for gold. But Arthur's strategy was different. He knew the 400 meters could punish those who spent their energy too early. Down the final straight, McKinley's form began to tighten, his legs heavy from lactic acid. Arthur, on the other hand, seemed to grow taller, his stride lengthening as he unleashed his famous finishing kick. With each step, the gap closed. 10 meters, 5 meters, 3. With just 15 meters to go, Arthur swept past his teammate, surging across the line in 46.2 seconds. The crowd erupted. Jamaica had its first ever Olympic gold medal, and it belonged to Arthur Wint. The moment was electric. In the stands, Jamaican supporters wept and embraced. Back home, radios crackled with the news, and in villages and towns across the island, people celebrated late into the night. For a small Caribbean nation still under colonial rule, Arthur's victory was a powerful symbol, proof that Jamaica could produce not just world-class athletes, but champions. The win was also a testament to Arthur's character. There was no gloating, no boastful display. He embraced McKinley warmly, acknowledging his teammates' effort. In interviews, he spoke not of personal glory, but of the honor of representing Jamaica. That humility endeared him to fans worldwide. But Arthur's Olympic story wasn't over. He still had the 4x400 meter relay to run, alongside McKinley, George Roden, and Les Lang. Many believed Jamaica could win another gold. In the heats, they looked dominant, cruising into the final. Then disaster struck. In the opening leg of the relay final, Arthur pulled a muscle. The pain was instant and severe, forcing him to slow dramatically. Jamaica's medal hopes evaporated in those few steps. It was a crushing moment, but Arthur accepted it with the same grace he showed in victory. Injury was part of an athlete's life, and he refused to let it define his games. By the close of London 1948, Arthur Wint left with a gold and a silver, an extraordinary achievement for a man balancing elite athletics with the rigors of medical school. He had become a symbol of discipline, humility, and resilience. Arthur Wint's gold medal was more than a personal triumph. It was a milestone for Jamaica, the spark that would ignite decades of sprinting dominance. But his journey was far from complete. 4 years later in Helsinki, he would return to the Olympic stage, older, wiser, and ready to etch his name even deeper into history. 4 years after London, the Olympic flame burned once again, this time in Helsinki, Finland. It was the summer of 1952, and the world had changed. The scars of war were beginning to fade, new nations were asserting themselves, and for Arthur Wint, now 32 years old, the Games were a chance to add one more glorious chapter to his athletic story. By 1952, Arthur was no longer the wide-eyed newcomer of London. He was a seasoned competitor, a qualified doctor, and a respected figure both on and off the track. Yet despite his growing medical career, his dedication to training had not wavered. Every morning, before the hospital wards filled with patients, he would be out running, refining his stride, sharpening his speed, and preparing his body for one last Olympic campaign. Helsinki brought together the strongest field of athletes in years. The United States, the Soviet Union, and a host of new Olympic nations had entered the fray. Jamaica's team, though small, carried big ambitions. Alongside Wint were familiar names: Herb McKinley, George Roden, and Lei Lang, all veterans of London 48 and now even more determined. Arthur's first event was once again the 800 meters. Just like in London, the race unfolded into a tense battle between Wint and the American Mal Whitfield. The two had great respect for each other, but neither was willing to give an inch on the track. The final stretch became a mirror image of their duel in London. Whitfield's power against Wint's towering stride. Once again, Whitfield edged ahead, claiming gold, while Arthur took silver. It was a repeat of 1948, but Arthur accepted it with his usual composure. For him, the bigger prize lay ahead. That prize was the 4x400 meter relay. Jamaica had come agonizingly close in London before injury struck. Now they were determined to finish what they had started. The relay squad, Lang, McKinley, Wint, and Roden, was a perfect blend of speed and experience. Their chemistry was unmatched. They knew each other's rhythms, each other's strengths. In the heats, Jamaica ran smooth and controlled, conserving energy while still winning comfortably. The final, however, was a different matter. The Americans, favored to win, lined up in adjacent lanes, their sprinters oozing confidence. The atmosphere inside Helsinki Olympic Stadium crackled with anticipation. Lei Lang led off for Jamaica, running a controlled first leg before passing the baton to McKinley. Known for his fearless starts, McKinley blasted down the back straight, clawing back any deficit and putting Jamaica firmly in contention. The baton then went to Arthur. This was his moment. At 32, many sprinters would be slowing down, but Arthur's 400 meters was a masterclass in pacing and precision. He surged through the first 200 meters, held his form through the bend, and unleashed a powerful drive down the home straight. By the time he handed the baton to George Roden, Jamaica was right alongside the Americans. Roden, himself an Olympic champion in the individual 400 meters, ran with the poise of a man who knew history was within his grasp. He powered through the final straight, crossing the line in 3 minutes, 3.9 seconds, a new world record. The stadium erupted. Jamaica, a tiny Caribbean nation still under British rule, had just beaten the mighty United States in their own event and set a world record in the process. It was one of the defining moments of the Games. And for Jamaica, it was more than sport. It was a statement. Arthur stood on the podium alongside his teammates, gold medal around his neck. The Jamaican contingent in the crowd cheering wildly. For him, this victory was the perfect balance to London 48. Where injury had robbed him of a relay medal, now he had helped deliver the ultimate prize. When asked afterward what the win meant, Arthur's answer was telling. He didn't speak of personal satisfaction or revenge for London. Instead, he talked about the pride of representing Jamaica, about the team effort, and about how victories like this could inspire the next generation. The 1952 Games would be Arthur's last Olympic appearance. He had won 2 golds and 2 silvers across 2 games, set a world record, and helped cement Jamaica's place in the world of track and field. His name was now etched alongside the greatest runners in history. For most athletes, this would have been the pinnacle. But for Arthur Wint, the Olympic champion, the next chapter of his life would take him far from stadiums and starting blocks, into hospital wards, rural clinics, and the halls of diplomacy. With Helsinki behind him, Arthur Wint made a decision that surprised many. At 32, still capable of world-class performances, he chose to retire from competitive athletics. For Arthur, the choice was simple. His future belonged to medicine. In 1953, he completed his medical degree from St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London. The journey had not been easy. Years of balancing study with elite competition had required unshakable discipline. But now, with diploma in hand, he was ready to return to Jamaica, not as an athlete, but as a healer. In 1955, Arthur took up a post as the only doctor in Hanover Parish, a rural region in western Jamaica. For many residents, he was their first and only point of contact for medical care. His days were long and varied, treating everything from tropical fevers to broken bones, delivering babies in the dead of night, and sometimes making house calls on horseback or by jeep over rough terrain. Patients remember him as calm, attentive, and deeply compassionate. His fame as an athlete brought a certain awe, but in the clinic, he was simply Dr. Wint. He treated rich and poor alike, never turning away those who couldn't pay. For him, medicine was service, not status. Arthur's work didn't go unnoticed. In 1954, a year before returning home, he had been appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE, by Queen Elizabeth II for his services to sport. In 1973, Jamaica awarded him the Order of Distinction for his contributions to medicine and athletics. In 1974, another unexpected chapter began. The Jamaican government appointed Arthur as High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, the country's top diplomatic post in London. It was a role that combined his international stature with his deep sense of national pride. He also served as ambassador to Sweden and Denmark during this period. As High Commissioner, Arthur represented Jamaica in trade negotiations, cultural exchanges, and Commonwealth meetings. He hosted dignitaries, spoke at universities, and championed Jamaican causes abroad. Always impeccably dressed, his towering figure and quiet authority commanded respect in diplomatic circles. Yet even in diplomacy, Arthur's heart remained in service. After his term ended in 1978, he returned once more to Hanover to continue his medical practice. For the next several years, he worked tirelessly, often putting the needs of his patients before his own comfort. In 1985, after decades of service, Arthur finally retired from medicine. By then, he had become a symbol of integrity and dedication. A man who had reached the pinnacle of sport, served his country in war, healed the sick, and represented his nation on the world stage. Arthur Wint's life after athletics was proof that greatness is not confined to one arena. For him, the gold medals were only part of the story. His true legacy lay in the lives he touched, the barriers he broke, and the example he set for generations to come. On October 19, 1992, Jamaica's National Heroes Day, Arthur Wint passed away in Linstead, St. Catherine. He was 72 years old. His death was met with tributes from across Jamaica and around the world. Prime Minister Michael Manley called him a true son of Jamaica, a man whose life embodied the values of discipline, service, and humility. Arthur's legacy lives on in countless ways. Statues of him stand proudly in Kingston, and one of the city's main roads bears his name, Arthur Wint Drive. His achievements are taught in schools, his races replayed in documentaries, his story told to inspire young athletes. In 1977, he was inducted into the Black Athletes Hall of Fame. In 1989, he entered the Jamaica Sports Hall of Fame, and in 2003, more than a decade after his passing, He was honored in the Central American and Caribbean Athletic Confederation Hall of Fame. In London, where he had trained as both an athlete and a doctor, his former home was marked with a blue heritage plaque in 2012, a permanent reminder of his contribution to British and Jamaican history. That same year, his daughter, Valerie Wint, published The Longer Run, a biography that captures both the public and private sides of her father's remarkable life. Beyond formal honors, Arthur's impact is felt most in the culture of Jamaican athletics. The generation that followed, Don Quarry, Merlene Ottey, Usain Bolt, Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, all walked through the door Arthur opened. His Olympic gold in 1948 was the seed from which Jamaica's sprinting dynasty grew. But Arthur's story also resonates beyond sport. It is the story of a man who refused to be defined by a single achievement. He was a champion sprinter, a decorated pilot, a dedicated doctor, and a skilled diplomat. Each chapter of his life was marked by the same quiet determination, the same refusal to chase fame for its own sake. In communities across Jamaica, older residents still tell stories of Doc Wint, the doctor who made time for everyone, the man who never raised his voice, the athlete who returned home when he could have stayed abroad in comfort. Arthur Wint once said that running taught him more than how to win races. It taught him discipline, patience, and the value of pacing yourself, in sport and in life. Perhaps that is why, long after the cheers faded, his influence endured. Today, when a Jamaican sprinter steps onto the track at the Olympics, there is a little bit of Arthur Wint in their stride. The measured confidence, the understanding of when to hold back and when to unleash everything. These are lessons passed down from the gentle giant who showed the world what Jamaica could do. From Plowden to London, from the skies of war to the quiet halls of rural clinics, Arthur Wint's journey was one of grace, courage, and service. He ran his race, and he ran it well.